Well, I think it's being done already, more than it was 10 or 15 years ago. The homeschooling movement is bringing back classical education in a very big way. Plus, you see these academies popping up all over the place. I just heard from somebody yesterday morning in Minnesota about to start a school. And she wanted advice. I had none because I never started a school. But she wanted advice for curriculum and so forth. And I just said, keep it simple, keep it direct. Not a lot of theory. Teach. I think Jefferson said, and this would sound amazing to us, that until the age of 13, you really have no business learning anything but languages and math anyway. I think he would have included geography as well. But the point is, he wanted something to exercise the mind, a lot of memorizing, because it's good for you. It's good to exercise the mind. C.S. Lewis said this too, several places when he wrote about education. Anything that makes you exercise the mind through memorizing when you're young, very young, 4, 10, is a good thing. So the prospects for classical education in America, I believe, are bright, but they're diffuse. And they hang on, these prospects hang on slender threads because for homeschooling, you have parents who've never studied the languages. And they're learning along with their children, and that's great, but they can take that only so far. The day comes when you want to start reading in Tullis, and you're going to need somebody who's knowledgeable. Usually such people, if they're living anywhere near a college or university with a classics program, they'll get some college junior or senior to come in and teach them. And so they'll contract out that work, and that will usually do the trick. The only warning sign I see with these academies is that people like the idea in theory of what a classical education is, but once they get into these, many of these parents, once they get into these situations, they take it upon themselves to define for themselves what a classical education is. And there's a book out there called A Thomas Jefferson Education. It's a bit sentimental, perhaps. But once they start working with their own children, they say, well, to hell with his education. This is what I think is classical. Well, sure, they have full legal and moral right to make those decisions for the children. But already the ideal is being watered down. But still, I say that the prospects are better than they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think we should be contemptuous of the classics in a distilled form, because I think very often that's what leads people to do further study. That's where they first get inspired, where they first get interested in Greece and Rome and its culture. And you have to start somewhere. Unless we go back to what the founders had, which was required Greek and Latin, which I don't see happening. That's the only way, is to start with it in a distilled form and hope that the eloquence and substance of it inspires people to do more.
I think we may have time for just the last one, and then we'll take a break. Please go ahead.
I'd like to thank all of you for your presentations. They were all very interesting, but this question is for Dr. McInerney. I would like to know, when you were talking about Leo Strauss, I was wondering if your criticism of his ideas was criticism of his interpretations of the classic works of Homer and Plato, or if it was a criticism of the neoconservative movement in general.
It's a fine question. It's definitely the latter. And I should point out, in case anyone is thinking that I was being party-pree and just giving a left-wing or a liberal interpretation, there are many conservatives who distance themselves from neoconservatism because they see it as being a state activist version of conservatism that is at odds with the libertarian approach that would emphasize individual rights of a small state. So there are people who are critics of Strauss both on the left and on the right. As for the first part of your question, was I criticizing his reading of the classics? Definitely. Most specifically, his reading of Thucydides. Unfortunately, I cut, for time constraints, some of the specific quotations in which he talks about Thucydides. But there are moments when he says, I'll try to get this from memory, he says essentially that Thucydides has to use a language that conceals reality and coats it in a new exterior because ordinary people are incapable of understanding his grasp of reality. Now, to me, that's like saying if you can understand Strauss, he might teach you the secret handshake. I don't believe that he understood Thucydides at all. Thucydides is a difficult text to read, there's no doubt about it. Many people have pointed out that you can read the report of Thucydides and what he says about a particular battle or a set of events, and you can read the editor, Thucydides, who is trying to lead you towards a judgment of what we would call political science. Sometimes you have to read them against each other. It's not a simple, easy text by any means. I mean, the way it's turned up in at least 3 or 4 different talks in 2 days from different points of view illustrates the complexity of it. But I don't think it helps to maintain that I have a secret knowledge of Thucydides that none of you share. That to me is simply beyond the pale. So I would say I'm criticising both his reading of Thucydides and also a rather poor application of that towards a fairly bogus policy. Should we take a break?